We are remembering Madam C.J. Walker. She was an entrepreneur in the early 1900s, making hair care products specifically for Black women. Walker became a self-made millionaire, eventually settling in Irvington, New York. Juneteenth is a holiday marking the end of slavery in the United States. With growing calls to recognize African-American historical events, there's been an increasing demand to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. June 19th, 1865 was the day enslaved people in Texas learned they were free. This was more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation because Texas slave owners didn't share the news. Last year, then Senator Kamala Harris introduced a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday. So far, it has not passed. Right now, there are only 3 states that do not recognize Juneteenth in some official way: Hawaii, South Dakota, and North Dakota. Some people say Juneteenth is not only for Black people to celebrate.
I need white people to celebrate. I need Asian people to celebrate. I need Latinx people to celebrate it because as we know, one group's liberation is grounded in all of our liberation.
Juneteenth has been declared a paid holiday for state workers in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Now back to the Underground Railroad and how New York was a main hub in the mid-1800s. What was it like for a freedom seeker? CBS 2's Steve Overmyer takes us inside a historic safe haven in Brooklyn Heights.
The fear, the hope, the uncertainty, and the sense of safety are all part of this story.
We're underneath Plymouth Church in Brooklyn. 170 years ago, this was the path to freedom.
As you walk forward, watch your head because the ceilings get lower and lower, and turn to your right at that first arch.
Melissa Collum is a historian at Plymouth Church. They've granted us access to a station on the Underground Railroad. Long before actual trains coursed through the city, Brooklyn was open farmland and home to many anti-slavery churches.
People were coming across the East River from Manhattan on ferries, and in the winter, the river would be filled with ice. So it really was a separate place from Manhattan.
Plymouth Church was founded by Quakers who played a huge role in the formation of the Underground Railroad.
A famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, Charles B. Ray, was a minister at an African-American church in Brooklyn, would bring people here for safety.
Beneath this holy place, in a sub-basement behind a steel door, freedom seekers would find their sanctuary.
This is so low. Jeez.
You can feel it's a pretty uncomfortable space.
They'd stay for 1 or 2 nights.
They would get some rest. They would get some food. You can imagine how hungry people would be on this journey.
Remember, this was 30 years before the electrical age would begin, so travel would be under the cover of darkness.
So it's a misconception to think that once people got to New York, they were safe.
The streets of Manhattan were filled with bounty hunters.
So this is really dangerous.
But in this stone-walled room with a dirt floor and no windows, history comes to life.
I've had people say that they can feel this sense of security in this space. This foundation is from 1823, and it's still standing. So you feel this sense of being protected.
After months of travel, living in fear, relying on both Black and white supporters, they'd arrive here. Of course, there's no documentation of who came through or how many, but they all shared the same belief in a possible future.
You could only imagine what they had to feel like this was the only way for them to make it in the world.
It's a really special combination of risk and hope. It's an enormous risk for everyone involved, but there also is a sense of hope and possibility that there still is life worth living, and taking that risk to get there is worth it.
Because living in extraordinary times amplifies the call for exceptional people. In Brooklyn, Steve Overmyer, CBS 2 News.
The history of Long Island's early Black leaders is found at the Mary Bell House in Center Moriches. The home was in jeopardy of being demolished, but now it's won a state preservation award. CBS 2's Carolyn Gusoff has more on the importance of the Mary Bell House.
Open the door to this modest wooden Victorian and take a step back in time. A time of freed slaves in the middle of Long Island.
Long Island was a very prominent area for slavery.
The tiny house on Railroad Avenue in Center Moriches was home in 1872 to a pillar of the community, Mary Bell, who in the mid-1800s led free slaves with what little they had to build one of Long Island's first black churches. It's named for her, the Bell AME Zion Church. Her house held services while the church was being built. A century later, it changed hands.
It was falling apart.
Local preservationist Bertram Sides rallied to save it from the wrecking ball.
Most of the work that was done here was donated services. We had no funds specific for the restoration.
The town of Brookhaven bought the land to rescue the house.
It's important. Once you lose history, you can't get it back again.
You're warming your hands over a cast iron stove.
Now, a decade later, it's a registered historic site and honored with the prestigious New York Historic Preservation Award.
The house retains a small front parlor.
No running water, central heat, or electricity. Mary's daughter Alice lived here till the 1980s, also a church pioneer.
If you got a snowstorm or she need a grass cut or anything, you go to Miss Bell's house and you take care of what she need done, and you take no money from her.
Thanks to determined volunteers, the story of emancipated slaves and their priorities lives on.
They created a community center first for all these families to come together. It's a success story of women, African-American women, who thrived and became pillars of their community.
The award is not monetary, it's an honor for excellence in preserving our history. The house is open to tours by reservation. In Center Moriches, Long Island, Carolyn Gusoff, CBS 2 News.
A lot of history was made at the presidential inauguration. Amanda Gorman, an African-American who just graduated from Harvard University, is now the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history. CBS 2's Kristine Johnson has more on the impact of Black poets on our history and culture.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade?
At President Joe Biden's inauguration, Amanda Gorman's words and presence captivated the nation.
Today, we honor our 3 captains.
And she did it again at the Super Bowl. She follows in the deep footprints of African-American poets that have come before her. In 1761, Jupiter Hammond, a slave on Long Island, was the first Black poet to be published in North America. Phyllis Wheatley, enslaved in Boston, was the first to have a book of poetry published in 1773. In more recent times, there were greats like Langston Hughes, a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. And of course, the raw, inspirational words of Maya Angelou.
Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak miraculously clear.
From the iconic Angelou to this new generation of poets, Urban Word, a dynamic 22-year-old organization, nurtures the voices and the souls of young people whose words are making a difference.
We believe that poetry, hip hop, the arts are ways to promote literacy, are ways to explore social justice issues, as well as just expanding on youth leadership opportunities.
Chanel Gabriel is Urban Word's executive director.
We tend to have students that are underserved in their own communities. So that is BIPOC students, LGBTQI population. But we do primarily serve Black and Brown students here in New York City. And now virtually we serve even further than that.
Serving students like Tia.
What is a name? Is it a series of letters strung together to form a label?
Nathaniel.
She can make a packed room go deaf with a smile so dope and a jaw so stone she crack rock.
And Jalissa.
Peace and we will be in these streets. Brothers marching for sisters, sisters marching for brothers.
They say Urban Word helped them refine their poetic voice.
So it got me into college. It got me money to go to college. It's still bringing me money now. I perform.
19-year-old Nathaniel Swanson is from East New York, now attending DePaul University in Indiana.
It definitely is something that allowed me to understand more about myself and really challenge myself.
Jalissa Lakin is a 19-year-old student at Monroe College.
I usually don't write about politics and kind of steer off in that way. But I'm finding it more important, like I've started writing poems about voting, I've written about the Capitol.
And Tia Walker, heading to Dartmouth in the fall, says Amanda Gorman speaks what's possible.
It's really cool seeing like an African-American woman, going out there and really making a career of spoken word.
Gabriel says she has seen the transformational power of urban word, bringing these young poets a hopeful social awakening and helping to stoke these voices of the future.
It's a wildfire that's spreading. Now we're seeing that this is, there's so much that can be gained from passing the mic.
Kristine Johnson, CBS 2 News.
We have the full readings of some of the young poets Kristine featured in her story. You can find that streaming on CBSN New York. You can also find a link to Urban Word by going to our website, cbsnewyork.com. Coming up, the reluctance to get the COVID vaccine, how the history of medical testing has fueled skepticism about the vaccine in communities of color. And the Divine Nine has a rich history of African-American fraternities and sororities, how the involvement lasts for generations. And here's an Alpha Kappa Alpha we all know.
Hi, I'm calling to speak with the artist known as Ty.
Then Senator Kamala Harris calling a young artist named Ty. He's really making a name for himself, and you'll see his story when we come back.